We live in a time when most expressions of courage by young men are evidences really of weakness and an insecurity that's deeply rooted in their essence. Society today celebrates a form of masculine courage that I'm going to argue is actually it's quite shallow and superficial. We're taught culturally that courage can be expressed by young men by way of physical aggression and not being emotional or showing any emotional responses that are appropriate, or even the very fact that to be vulnerable is a weakness. And these shallow and superficial expressions that have been celebrated in our media consumption and our cultural responses are quite detrimental, and they rob young men today of what true courage could look like. These aren't courageous expressions at all, but I'm going to argue again that they're a form of deep insecurities and come from a source of weakness internally that needs to be challenged. In fact, I'm going to argue further that the true expression of courageousness is found in one's pursuit of living with integrity. And this is a call to young men to step up and take on a true form of courageousness that is life transforming. But let's consider some of these forms of courage that I am challenging. I have a handful of them here. The first one we're going to talk about is physical aggression. Physical aggression, or the desire to display or to demonstrate one's dominance or their control over others. This may be seen or expressed by way of engaging in physical fights or even in physical intimidation. It may be seen as a display of strength, but really at the root of it, for all of its bravado, for all of its intimidation factor, it's really rooted in a need for one to prove themselves, especially amongst their peers. It may be compelling because it's seen as a display of strength. Wow, look at that individual. You don't mess with them because they're willing to flex and show that they're not going to be messed around with, and that they're willing to fight or to apply pressure physically. But true courage isn't found here. This is just actually a really shallow form of courage that does not address the desperate areas that need to be addressed. True courage, however, digs deep. True courage digs deep, especially in one's willingness to speak up for what's right, to be able to know how to articulate and to communicate. Here is where my stance lies, without having to resort to this form of physical aggression. It involves not only standing up for oneself and what one's values are, but it also involves standing up for others as well in a way that is respectful, in a way that is non-violent, in a way that is accessible. It requires young men to learn appropriate ways of communicating their thoughts and feelings, even in the midst of conflict. And it is a certainty that every single one of us faces conflict in some way or another. The real challenge, the real point of expressing what courage looks like is how well does an individual learn how to communicate appropriately their perspectives and their thoughts without having to just as a first resort stick up their fists and try to engage that way in resolution of conflict. Instead of that physical aggressiveness that is what's celebrated and that is common, it takes a lot more intuitiveness to be assertive. And see, courage requires a young man to cultivate the sense of self-awareness and to be empathetic in the way that they respond, and even to be aware of the way that their behaviors are going to impact those around them. And so really what we're looking for here is how can we engage courageously in a way that The result promotes peace and harmony instead of violence and aggression. There is chaos when one tries to express their courageousness through physical aggression. There's a lack of one feeling safe. There is a disposition of tension that's increased when one pursues this. But when one's willing to be aware of themselves and what their feelings are and learn how to communicate those and learns how to stand assertively for those perspectives that they can articulate, there is a sense of peace and harmony that can be cultivated. Herein is where true courageousness shows its merits. It shows its merits because it requires hard work to get to this place where one can wield words instead of fists to be able to address concerns and conflicts. This is where true courage lies. Another form of a shallow expression of courage is seen in young men learning to suppress their emotions because they believe that expressing their emotions is really just a display of vulnerability, which is categorized as a weakness. This leads, of course, to avoiding emotional conversations or even emotional situations in general. It leads some young men to consume substances of various sorts so that they can numb that sense of feeling. And so young men are taught, don't express emotion. Be stoic, be impenetrable. And this, even though it is perceived as courageous because it's a show of strength, perceivably, is really a lack of courageousness. It's lack of courageousness because this is not a display of courage, but it's actually a display of fear when they suppress emotions, a fear of one really being seen in that vulnerable zone of emotional expression. It's seen as a weakness where if you were to show this side of yourself, you are going to be susceptible to attack. And so how better to protect oneself than to close off those emotions and to not permit their expression. What does it look like when you're sad? What does it look like when you're confused, or when you're perplexed, or when you're worried, or when you are like these vulnerable emotions? What does that look like when one experiences them in a way that feels safe? So there's this suppression of emotions, and what courageousness with integrity looks like is one being willing to be honest about what they're feeling, especially in the face of discomfort. Do you know, dear listener, how courageous it is to be able to own what you're feeling inside? A lack of courage is suppressing it and saying, I gotta push this down because I can't let anyone see this. That is weakness there. We think that's strength when you can suppress that. No, that's actually a lack of courageousness and being able to say, here's what I'm really feeling, and to be able to share that. That is what takes true courage. Instead of hiding behind this facade of toughness and impenetrableness, courageousness learns to embrace emotions as a natural part of our human experience. Do you know that you're not the only one who fears, and you're not the only one who worries, and you're not the only one who's perplexed and afraid and all these other things? You're not the only one that has these feelings. This is a human experience that we all share. Courage learns how to embrace these emotions, how to own them, how to legitimize them, and then further how to communicate them and say, actually, I'm not in a good space right now. I'm going to need some time or space, or I'm going to need some support in this way, X, Y, or Z. That's true courage there. That takes massive guts to be able to say, I can willingly express what's going on in here. That is bravery on display. Courage learns to share feelings with others in a way that promotes understanding. When you're able to communicate what's going on inside here, you're able to say, I'm going to share with you something, and it enables someone else to be able to now share and have access to where you're at. That is courageous. That's magnificent, and it promotes this connection, this resonance, this accessibility. Courageousness learns how to share one's feelings with others in a way that promotes understanding, and instead of suppressing those emotions and feeling detached from them, it in essence promotes an emotional intelligence that is so saddeningly low in our cultural experience today. It promotes further healthy communication from one person to the next, and these are some happy outcomes. When we suppress our emotions because we feel that that is the courageous step, what happens in essence there is that a person becomes more isolated and more detached and more set aside. They don't feel connected with those that they're in community with. But true courageousness steps up and learns how to express and say, here's what I'm feeling, and then offer that to those around them, so that there is far more not only understanding but also connection. Another way that we see a form of courage that is predominant, that really is not courage, is when young men they learn that it is far better. When young men learn it's far better to be independent and to be self-sufficient. They believe that receiving help or being on being the recipient of help is another form of weakness and a form of one's inadequacy. They feel that they have to do everything, and that they can't express any need for help. As such, they are going to refuse any help from others, even when it's needed on their part. This form of courage, that is perceived as courage at least, is rooted in a sense of being perceived as inadequate, being dependent, being vulnerable. This is what that looks like. And so courage with integrity, however, involves a willingness to acknowledge one's limitations and also to seek help when it's needed. See, part of integrity is being honest with oneself. And courage that describes that integrity, where we are not complete, we had to learn dependence in our existence. We continue to learn what that dependence looks like. We continue to experience that there is a dependence that we have on so many factors in our world. And so true courage with integrity involves that willingness to acknowledge, I'm not the complete package. I'm going to need some assistance and help from those around me, especially when it's needed. This involves a cultivation of humility. Where one can grow in self-awareness, saying, here's where I do really well, but here's where I'm going to need some help. I'm going to need some inputs. This is very well exemplified when we go to school and we have to learn. We're dependent on the teacher to be able to pass on information that enables us to have skills to be able to make it a little further in life. And this is what life really is this awareness of where we are needing to grow and what it looks like to be in that space where others can have access to inputting and investing in us. Not only does it involve this cultivation of humility and self-awareness, but it's a recognition that we can't do everything on our own. We aren't made to figure out everything. We didn't create the wheel. We didn't create the toaster. We didn't create a whole bunch of things that we've come to rely on. And so it's just that acknowledgement, that recognition that we can't do everything, and that there is this acceptance of aid and help from others around us, that sense of dependence that is appropriate, that sense of sufficiency that also is mitigated by also what it looks like to lean on others. It's actively seeking help, not as a sign of weakness, but as a strength and maturity that says, hey, I know myself well enough to know that I don't have this all figured out. And so I'm going to ask for help when I need to. That is courageous. When one is willing to express their dependence on another, that requires courage. It's a paradox of sorts when we realize that expressing dependence or the need for help is actually a form of one embracing courageousness, because they're willing to own that they're not the complete package. It is like sticking our head in the sand when we say, I don't need any help, I'm good on my own kind of thing, and I can do this life on my own. That isn't courage. That's actually dishonesty with oneself. So accepting help shows a willingness to collaborate with others, a mutual support rather than an isolation or a sense of self-reliance that we have been imbibed and indoctrinated to believe is the appropriate form of courage. Real courage recognizes one's limits and a willingness to seek help, especially to overcome various challenges that we all face in life. Therein is true courage. A final form of courageousness that really isn't courage is a refusal of young men today to either compromise, when collaborating with others, or to admit when they're wrong and to try and make amends, to admit their mistakes. This is another form of courage that young men subscribe to, and they're like, yeah, I don't make any mistakes. And they refuse to own their mistakes. And they refuse to compromise even when there are other better ideas that are being considered. They believe that compromising when there's better ideas or admitting to mistakes is a sign of weakness again. And what this really is it's not really courage on display. It's actually a sign of insecurity. That's again driven by this fear of being seen as weak. What real courage with integrity looks like, however, is a willingness to consider different perspectives and being willing to adjust one's beliefs or values based on new intel that may be more compelling. Courageousness is really displayed when young men are willing to do the hard work of thinking through and not just rejecting blankets, doing a blanket rejection on all ideas that they're being presented with. It involves that willingness to own when you've made a mistake. Again, this is courage when you're willing to say, I was wrong. Do you know how difficult that is to say? That requires courage. Young men, consider how difficult it is. Like when you have the opportunity next time to say, I was wrong on this and I need to attend to and make this right. That is a difficult thing to say. And to say that requires courage. It takes no courage to say, I didn't do anything wrong, and to walk off dishonestly and pugnaciously without that opportunity for self-growth. But it requires real courage when a young man says, upon reflection, I was wrong on this, and I'm really sorry that I did X, Y, and Z. That is really astounding. That makes heads turn and say, did that just happen? That is true courage right there. When young men are willing to display that necessary self-awareness that says, I'm not going to let my insecurity run amok by me saying, no, I didn't do anything wrong, as opposed to saying, let me just take a moment to think on this. And then upon consideration, humbly saying, I was wrong on this one here, and I need to own that, and I want to make things right. That is not an easy thing to utter. That's where courage is, young men. It involves being open to feedback and being open to criticism without taking it personally, but considering how well does this serve me and me getting to be a better version of myself. It involves further recognizing your limitations. You aren't made to be a one-man show. You aren't made to do this life on your own. You're made to live in community, and part of that entails how well are you making yourself accessible to those you're in community with so that they can speak to you and help you grow to the next version of yourself. You can't do this on your own. It involves this willingness to be vulnerable. Do you know that being vulnerable or expressing vulnerability is actually courageousness on display? That is where true courage is. And most men don't take that because they're afraid. They're fearful and they don't want anyone to see that fear. But it takes true courage. It takes true bravery to show vulnerability. And to admit when you're wrong and to work to make amends, my goodness, mind blown. This is where courage lies, young man. And this is not an easy thing looking to step into. It takes hard work on your part to know yourself well enough, to know how not to take things personally, to know how not to see yourself as weak when you express your need of help from others and assistance, and to be able to do an about turn when you're wrong. This is where courage is. It's not being stubborn and clinging to your beliefs regardless of when you're wrong and refusing to back down. That is really a sign of immaturity. When you are so pugnaciously hanging on to your idea just because it's your idea, even though it's not the best one on the table, or your refusal to say when you were wrong and to admit your mistakes, that's immaturity. And young men, we need to grow up. We need to grow up and take on a new form of what integrity looks like in a courageous way. The way that most of us have learned to be courageous is so shallow, it's so superficial, it's so inadequate, and it keeps us stagnant. It keeps us from what we could really grow to be. And so this is my call to you, young men, to step up and to sign up for a deeper form of courageousness, not a courage that is easy, but a courage that is based on integrity. This pursuit of walking with integrity requires such a deep reservoir of courageousness that you're able to work on as you go through the process of becoming an individual, a young man of integrity. So my call for you is to reject these forms of superficial courageous expressions that we've talked about here, and to embrace a more authentic and a more meaningful, a deeper form of courage. And just so that I can be clear with you, when I'm calling you to step into this stream of courageous engagement as you pursue your integrity, let me just talk a little bit about what I mean when I say integrity, or walking with integrity, or pursuing integrity. For me, integrity is the consistent desire, okay? It's a consistent desire to have your inside values match your outward actions, to see your internal commitments and convictions aligned with your external expressions and actions, where you're being true to yourself and you're being respectful to those you're in community with. That is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about being a young man of integrity. That takes courage to step up to. That is not for the faint of heart. That is for those who are saying, I want to take on the next level of what it means to be a better version of me. That in itself is a courageous progression. That is deep and that's profound. This, my dear young listeners, is where true courage is on display. It is a difficult walk. It's not for the faint of heart. But this is where true courage lies. This is a challenge that I'm posing to you. And I'm asking you, are you willing to step up? Are you in the place in life where you're ready to step up? I'm going to propose that this was a scary challenge for me once upon a time when I did not know how to do this. I did not know how to progress into it. And now that I am where I'm at, and I've had to go through some deep valleys to get to this place where I'm presently at, it's my purpose to make this even more accessible to more young men. I still remember, young men, what it was like when I was feeling confused, when I was feeling unmoored, when I was feeling displaced, and I was longing, I was desperate for someone to model for, or to at least show me or describe for me how I could walk into the space that I'm currently in. I've never forgotten that feeling, and this is why this matters to me a lot, is because I still feel what that was once like when I was in this fog of trying to figure out, how do I become a better man? So if this is you, I'm happy that our paths have crossed. I would encourage you to join this community that I'm building here on this platform of others who are like-minded in pursuing what it looks like to walk with integrity, to be inspired by each expression of integrity as we hear it from others that propels us to say, I want a piece of that. And so if you haven't already done so, I would encourage you to like this video because that really helps algorithms to get this message out to more who are also in that same space. I'd encourage you to subscribe as well, to subscribe and be a part of this channel, and to continue to keep coming back, and even to drop your comments and your thoughts and reflections down below. I'd really appreciate hearing that feedback of how this message is impacting you and how it's encouraging you, or what other things you are thinking about that you would really be well served by as you're trying to figure out what does it look like for us young men to walk with integrity in this life and to increase our reason for why we exist, the purposefulness for why we're engaged in this world and living on purpose. So those are some starting things I would encourage you to do, and I would love to serve you even better by knowing some specifics of how can I curtail this content that I'm creating to serve you in helping you grow in your integrity. Let me know some of your thoughts. I would really appreciate that. But start off at least by subscribing and liking this video, and even dropping a comment. I would love and be encouraged to hear from you that way. And may I say that even though this is a challenging call that I am issuing to you young men to step up and to subscribe to what true courageousness looks like as you walk with integrity, it is possible. It is possible. It is going to dig deep in you, but this is where I say, join a community. Join this community for starters if you like. Learn what to look for in how it is to progress through this path of integrity and to become an amazing version of yourself. That's why I want to give myself to and devote time to make myself accessible this way. Thank you for watching this video. I look forward to seeing you on the next video that I create, or the ones that you're going to watch from my past content. But in the meantime, I hope you have a day that's filled with intention and courage as you walk with integrity. Talk to you soon.